All right. Good evening, LinkedIn. Dave Wilson, the Ringer Hire Show. Hey, listen, tonight, geez, Paul, I think this is the fourth time on the show. I love how Paul Falcone, and he lives over in the Los Angeles metropolitan area. Best author. I love all this, Paul. Best author, workplace leadership trainer, executive coach, keynote speaker. You worked at Nickelodeon. Boy, the list goes on, right?
It's a long list, but it's a fun list. It's a good list.
Yeah, it's really good. So everybody tonight, this has been another great book, and tonight we're going to be focused on the first time manager for HR. So we'll be right back after this video. Hey, Paul, you noticed I don't have HR in that video.
Yeah, but you do. Everything on there was HR. That's the funny thing. So no, you're fine, Dave. That's the coolest intro video I've ever seen. I love it.
I still love it. I still love it. It gets me all worked up every time I see it. You know, it's just
Sure.
it's fun. Before we start, Paul, we're going to talk about your book. I want to give my audience the time to get to know you again. If you can introduce yourself, what do you do, and what have you been doing with yourself?
So I spent about 3 decades, Dave, in human resources. I was head of HR for Nickelodeon Animation, head of international human resources for Paramount Pictures. I was with that company, Viacom, for about a decade. And people usually associate me with Nickelodeon because everyone smiles when they hear Nickelodeon.
I know, right?
They do. I also worked in healthcare at City of Hope, a wonderful cancer research hospital. I've worked in financial services. And so for me, I always had like parallel lives. I had my day job and then I had my writing. And so I was a columnist for SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, writing articles for them. And I've also been writing books for the American Management Association and for HarperCollins. And my career kind of informed my writing. I wanted to work in nonprofit, for-profit, Fortune 500,
Right.
startup, union, international, because I really wanted to understand that for the writing that I was doing. And it really turned out to be a really good rudder for my ship because it gave me a lot of experience out there, which is what I like to share now at this point. About 2 years ago, I launched my own consulting firm.
Yeah.
And now I specialize in management training and keynote speaking and executive coaching. So I'm having a blast.
I see all over LinkedIn now, boy. I'm like, I tell everybody, go on LinkedIn and see them. And before we start with the books, I wanted to tell Paul to how well I like Paul's books is my wife always knows on Amazon. So, Paul's got a new book out, because you're the only book I really order from. And I want to give you an example because I love this part always. I love it. Here's some of the books that Paul's written. And I'm going to tell you, if you're looking for training, these books are the best. I mean, you just can't get around it. You have a series of the effective hiring. I believe there's a series of these. I have a couple more of them to get.
Right. There's 5 books in the series. And they
called
it, yeah, HarperCollins called it the Paul Falcone Workplace Leadership Series. And I was so impressed. I was like, wait, you're using my name in the title? So it was really cool. But they're meant to be 5 books, shorter series, almost fit in the back of your pocket. But yeah, Dave, to your point, it's meant to build leadership muscle and help people.
Yeah, on this one. And I enjoyed this one too. And then this one here, I love the 2,600 phrases for effective performance reviews. This was one that was really popular. I really like this one here.
Look at you. You've got all my books. I love it. Yeah, that one has sold almost 250,000 copies. That book is the little red book and the little red engine that could. And it just keeps going and going and going. And I'm so glad that that's helped people become better writers when it comes to doing performance reviews. Because
it does, because like I told you before, I wish I would have had this way back in my career, but it gives you just some newer ideas too, that if like especially as a supervisor, like a new manager going up to a VP that has to do a lot of different reviews, this one is just top notch. I mean, you can go in there and just look through it and pick out what you want.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the plug. Yeah, and to your point, to me, that one was like, not only can you do it by the particular thing that you is performance, productivity, quality.
And-
But I also did it by particular industries and jobs, like the most common positions you'll find out there. And so this way, in the back half of the book, you can get more specific, you can dig deeper.
Right.
And if you don't find exactly what you're looking for, you can tweak it a little bit. But giving people the wording, it's kind of like that Tough Conversations book that I'd written. The
Yeah.
hardest part is getting them to open it up. And if you can just give them the first 3 to 5 sentences and they're comfortable with it, they'll have that conversation with employees.
We'll have
But if
that.
not, they look the other way and they sweep it under the rug, and it's that kind of problem. It never gets addressed.
And that's it, right? Oh, I love it. This one here was, this is what we talked about the last time. Was one of my really favorites, the first time manager, leading through crisis. That was our last show. This one here, I'll tell you what, for anybody, it's even starting out to be a lead, or a supervisor that is you could be at a smaller company. And this one I really recommend for all new leaders. Again, I wish I had this in the 90s. It would have helped me out a lot, because we didn't have these kind of things. We didn't have this information back in the 90s. We didn't have it.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, so there's a book called The First Time Manager. And
Right.
it came out in the 80s, and it's in its 7th edition. The book had sold 500,000 copies. It's still coming up as #1 on Amazon. And HarperCollins said, Paul, we want to build an umbrella underneath this. We want to do first-time manager sales, first-time
Right.
manager HR. Would you write the HR book? And I said, I'd love to. And they said, well, wait, before you write that one, can you write another book that would pair with all the other ones? So someone picks up the first-time manager sales book, they're going to say, ooh, I also need this book. And they said, just
Right.
about what that might be. And I said, I won't have to think about it for a minute, you guys. It's leading through crisis and disruption. That's what we're all going through these days in this post-COVID reintegration phase.
Yeah.
It's intense. So that's where that book came from.
It is, because again, the examples that you give in there, wow, I took this one really to heart, because I was like, wow, that was me. Wow, that was me. What I did on that one. This one's all, and I did this next book here. I got a couple people to buy it recently. That you can tell. I mean, I still got all my notes in this one,
Look at
but the
that.
90s book's
Wow.
great. It's the best. This one right here. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. That one is technically my second book, but it was the first one that really got me going. And I was writing for the American Management Association. I was doing that presentation at an AMA conference.
Right.
And so someone walked up to me and said, Paul, I'm an acquisitions editor here at AMA, and what you just presented on would make for great book content. And she said, I know you just wrote your first. This would be your second, but we're interested. And boom. And that one really took off, Dave. So that kind of put me on the map
For this one.
yeah. Yeah.
I like
That's,
how
it
you
all
gave
goes back there.
examples too. You gave examples to it, and then I liked how to expect from it. Like when you were asked the question, it would tell you what you could answer, but you didn't. You gave examples of it, like what they're expecting, what they want to hear, or kind of, and what you want to hear, or what you want to say.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, and what started in that book, and this was kind of inadvertent. I didn't know I was doing this, but people know what to do. They just don't know how to do it.
Right.
And even if you have an MBA from a top 10 school, they're not teaching about leadership in the trenches. They're talking about organizational design and organizational behavior and all this 30,000 foot level stuff.
Right.
When I wrote that book, it was like, okay, if you've got to interview a salesperson, a recent college grad, a C-level person, whatever, just give me 5 or 10 questions that I can feel comfortable with and what I can expect in terms of their answers and how I
Right.
could kind of maneuver within it. And so that's why I broke it down. I broke it down by the different kinds of interview questions that someone would typically deal with. And I think if anything, it's helped recruiters build their self-confidence.
It does, because I mean, it's different. There's different questions on here, but it really makes you think, because I think that was what drew me towards it. And when I've asked people these online, when I have them on the show and I ask them questions like this, I wish compared to the same basic questions all the time,
Yeah.
you can really pull out some good information on a candidate, versus the same thing. Where do you want to be in 5? Yeah, like the basis. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Or what's your weaknesses? Everything here. There's just so many different ones that I loved, from here.
Thank you. Yeah, it was meant to be more creative. There was a section where I talked about what are the basics and
Yep.
can you use them and how do you use them? But the reality is you've got to pierce someone's heart. The truth of the matter is if you're a good enough recruiter, you can build a relationship with a candidate in the first 5 minutes. Don't jump into,
Right.
tell me your greatest strength, tell me your greatest weakness. The relationship isn't ready for that yet. Ask them questions about them for 5 minutes. Tell me what's motivating you to look for another position right now. What are the 2 or 3 criteria that are
I
important to
love
you at
that.
this point
Yep.
in your career? If you accepted a job with us as you understand it now, how would you explain it to a prospective employer 3 to 5 years from now? Like, why would this make sense in terms of building your resume, building your LinkedIn profile? They start to sit on the edge of their chair. And now
Right.
they're getting into it because they realize you're asking them about them. And every once in a while, Dave, they'll say something like, well, you know what, Paul, I normally don't say this in an interview, but, and boom, now you got the real
Boom.
person. Now
Right.
they're talking to you heart to heart. So you got to pierce their heart. And that's the most important part of that book, as far as I'm concerned.
How much, Paul, with these books here, how much of it comes from that personal experience? Like, Anya, you know me, when I say this was me, this was me. I mean, when did you start writing the books? And then how much from your past is in these books, like things that have happened?
Pretty much 100%. I
Right.
can't say exactly 100% because, like in the
Right.
new book on first time manager HR, I hadn't worked in public sector HR, for example, the
Right.
government, and I haven't ever done HR department of one, but I still needed to make them chapters. So I had to do a little
Okay.
research on them and get other people to give me opinions. But to tell you the truth, Dave, everything in there is me. I mean, this is
That's
my career for the last 25 years.
right.
And what I was doing, where the cycle was remember I was writing for SHRM at the time. I was doing articles. And so when something happened in the workplace that I thought other people need to learn from this, that
Right.
became an article. And all of a sudden I had 20 or 30 articles and enough content for a book. And that's kind of where I went with all this stuff. And it just kind of was very organic. And it ended up following the employee life cycle from when you hire them and how you onboard them, to how you
Right.
motivate them, develop them, and coach them, to how you hold them accountable and have those constructive dialogues, but know how to structure terminations via progressive discipline,
For
to
that.
workplace ethics, which carries the whole thing. And that's how the books just kind of came along. It was almost like screaming at me, now you need to do this one. So that's how I
That's
got.
perfect. This one here I enjoy too. 75 ways for managers to hire, develop, and great employees to keep them. That's the main thing. This one was really good. Well, I enjoyed this read here. And again, for just like the new managers, I always keep saying that these are the kind of things that it's just some really good read to learn everything because you're not taught it all. As a leader, I wish some of the companies would put more training into to the employees or leadership, but if you need to go to some books, these are some really good things that you've done here on this
Thanks,
one.
Dave. I've always written for a management audience, but I've said this could be from the first time manager
Yep.
through a VP, senior VP level, or a business owner, because people, especially in smaller companies, oftentimes
Right.
didn't go through the formal training, and you don't want them to step on landmines.
Yep.
You can make the argument that experience is your greatest teacher, but you're going to step on landmines all the way through. Wouldn't it be
Oh,
nice if you could have someone give you the shortcut and say, listen, this is what you might want to consider doing because it'll avoid this risk and make the
right.
employees feel more engaged? And that's kind of what the spirit of it all has been.
And it's nothing new. It's like what we all talk about today. A lot of this is just nothing's changed. It's the same things that go on and on and on. That people want to learn. This one was really another good one here. We got two more. The 101 tough conversations. This one was really good because this was me on steroids on a lot of them because you didn't know. You didn't know. If nobody taught you that, you had to just kind of not wing it, but you just learned by experience through it.
Yeah, and winging it isn't the wrong term in this case. I think a lot of people did. And I've always said the path of least resistance is avoidance.
Right.
So people
I like
avoid
that.
it and they sweep it under the rug and they look the other way until boom, some proverbial straw is broken on the camel's back. And then they come running into my office in HR and say, I want the guy fired. And I'm like, okay, slow down. Let's see. So you'll take
Right.
a look at the personnel file and they've been here for 3 years and they have 3 years of excellent performance reviews. There is no progressive discipline whatsoever. And it's like the manager didn't do his or her job. So for me, what was so important as an HR guy is when I would go into new companies, I would want to do management training, lunch and learns. But my idea was, give people back to themselves,
That's
help these managers become more self-confident, more self-aware, help them build that emotional intelligence, but teach them how the
together. Yep.
employment law works because they're all HR. They all have the responsibility for leading, motivating, developing, terminating, whatever it happens to be. And those are portable skills they can take with them for the rest of their
Yep.
career. So
I
that was my
told I've
strategy.
told myself, Paul, from these books is that is the thing I learned from here is I always tell new leaders and new supervisors, listen, If you go home and take it home, don't do it like that. You take it home with you. You got to nip it in the bud. You'll feel so much better instead of waiting 2 weeks and then going to a meeting and trying, you know what I mean? You really wanted to have that conversation now, because then you'll feel so much better. It'll be off your chest. You don't have to bring it home to your family, which a lot of people do. And that's what I did. But once I even read some of this stuff here, it was like, you just got to have it. I mean, it's part of life.
To your point, Dave, but what I say in like the first page of that book is, it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
How you say it.
And
Yep.
it was a second grade lesson we all learned, and it seemed to make sense, but it got lost in translation as we became adults. And then, we moved into management, and it's like, it's really hard to open the can of worms, and I get it. But one of the things we know, when you look at the Gen Y millennials, the 45 and under
Right.
crowd, and the Gen Z Zoomers, the 25 and under crowd, these are the most studied generational cohorts in world history. We know everything about them. And in survey after survey after survey, one of the top 5 things they want is career and professional development. And what that means is you got to give them real-time feedback.
Yeah.
You can give it constructively. You don't have to, you always do this, you never do that. You don't have to make them feel bad or guilty about anything, but help raise awareness. Talk to them about, let me share with you what worked when I was in your role. Or let's talk about what your options were at the time when you were thinking this through, because maybe the rest of us can learn from it too. But you put this positive spin on learning.
Yep.
It just changes everything. It is such a big game changer in terms of how people relate to you. And all of a sudden they're going to say, oh, Paul Falcone was my favorite boss. He's the best boss I've ever had.
Right.
Because you didn't make them feel bad about themselves. You really did help them build muscle that they knew they wanted it and they needed it, but you put it in a way that never made them feel offended, made them feel like they had to be defensive or feel guilty for anything. So that's kind of
that makes total sense. I love it. I do have 2 more. This was my baby here. This one here, hiring and firing.
You have.
Yeah, I know. I got one more here. I tell everybody. Then we're going to get into the subject of the real book here, the new one here. But this one here, the hiring and firing. This was one of my favorites too. Yeah, I just enjoyed it because those are the 2 main words I think that really stand out in everything. It's right there, hiring, firing. That's it.
Yeah, and that's, again, the funny thing is there is a lot of liability out there, and managers are good, well-intentioned people. They're not doing, and no one goes to work thinking, I'm going to mess things up today. But you'd be surprised. It's all in the delivery. It's all in setting the expectations the right way. Right. And to the point we said earlier, it's a healthy degree of vulnerability. Vulnerability is important. When your people feel like you're being honest with them, they're going to respond a certain way. When they think you're in it for you, through them, right, it's a whole different ball of wax. They're gonna respond very differently. And what you want them to do is give discretionary effort and feel like they're on the top of Maslow's hierarchy, right? They're hitting it on all pistons, all cylinders. They feel like they can do their best work every day with peace of mind because their boss has their back. This is not that hard to do. It's not that hard to do, Dave. But managers tell themselves these narratives sometimes. To be respected, you have to be feared. I'm not going to recognize my employees because it'll go to their head. They'll want more money. They tell themselves these things, and I get it, but it's like, but that's just not true. You kind of made it up. So
I tell people, I always say, if you enjoy firing people, something's wrong with you. Something is wrong with you, because I don't care. I'll say it. I'm 58 years old and I still get nervous if I had to let somebody go. My stomach still gets bothered by it, because it's like, if you enjoy that going into that meeting, I don't know who does. It's not great. It's not.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, when you terminate someone, right, a lot of times the manager who's terminating them, body language is very closed. They get very formal, very, very distant, very arm's length. What I advise is, what you tell people is this: don't do it on a Friday afternoon at 5. Do it early in the day. Do it early in the week. And, this way, because they can have access to you. They may have questions. They may want to talk. I want them to be able to call me back. But I would say, I'm sorry it's come to this, and we had to do this termination because it did violate what happened yesterday, violated the terms of the final written warning. I just want to let you know if I can help you with anything, if you need help with your resume, if you want to do a mock role play, because you haven't interviewed in a while, if you need help with your unemployment or your COBRA application, just call me. I'll always prioritize your call.
I love that. I think that I love how that is. I love it.
And then they can heal. A lawsuit is a tool of workplace revenge, right? They feel like they were handled unfairly. And then oftentimes they were humiliated when they were most vulnerable at the time of termination. You're not going to believe what my manager told me or how my manager handled it. It's like, life is too short. they did their best. They didn't come into work trying to get, even if they stole from the company,
Yep.
it's like, okay, there could be some places embezzlement, right? I'm not going to offer them quite the same service. But
Right.
overall, generally speaking, if they
Yeah.
tried and it didn't work, be there for them.
Yep.
That's all. Let them walk out with their head held high and wish them luck and tell them I'm here to help with whatever you need. I just think it makes such a difference that they hear, because remember, they're consumers too. So they may be
Right.
buying from your company at some point. Let them walk out feeling good about the last 2 years or the last 5 years or 2 months, however long it's been that they were with you, that it wasn't personal. It's just, we do need to move in this direction
To move
based on
there.
what's occurred. And I think
No,
you
that
can
makes
build on
total
that.
sense. This one here, last one, and then we're going to get into the new book. This, I like this. This is a thick one. This must have took you forever, but I
That
like
one,
this.
yes, that was like giving birth. Yes.
Yeah, and what I liked about this is, again, the wording.
Says
You
the
can
man who
choose.
knows nothing about giving birth. Yes. I'm sorry. What?
Yeah, right. I like how you can go in here and, like you said, you don't have to use the exact wording. You just change it whatever way you need it, but it gives you so many different ways to choose from. And there were some of them I agreed with, and then some I'm like, well, maybe I would say it like this, but I think that's the purpose of why you did it like this, because this one is thick. Whew.
The examples, though,
Yeah.
are the key. When I was new and I was learning employee and labor relations, I was trying to find books on how do you write up people, and all the books were written by lawyers. It was all theory, and you were lucky if in the footnote, Dave, it gave you a little
Right.
bit of an example of what the language might sound like. And I just toppled that. I said, no, I want the examples of what this is supposed to look like as the
Nice.
star of the show, and then the footnotes, I have the legal blah blah blah. And when you can give people examples of performance issues, conduct issues, attendance reliability issues, letters of clarification, same day summaries, all this kind of stuff, all of a sudden they're like, well, this isn't so hard to do. And things typically follow a pattern. If someone is engaged in harassing behavior, the
Right.
specific facts, part one, yeah, it's going to change. The date, the time, the location, what happened, that's going to change. But part two, the company's expectations and the training to be provided,
Right.
that can basically stay the same. Part three, the outcomes, if this happens again, the following will occur. That's going to stay the same too. So things tend to stay the same when you're in the same pod, when you're in the
Right.
same family. So sales performance has one template, right? But
Right.
substandard quality or customer service has a different template. Give people those 3 or 4 from each category. They can put it together. And the best thing that'll happen is some third party, maybe a lawyer, is going to look at it and say, wow, you did a great job with this documentation. This was excellent. And they can take full credit for it. And they don't have to say anything about it was from the book I got. But that's really what the theory is. They're not trained on this. And how
Right.
are they expected to figure it out? Let the book do the work for you. It's like that kind of thing. So
Like that. Well, I'll tell you what. When I got the book, it took me about 2 weeks, and what I wanted to tell you, I was like, all right. So I always write my notes for the show with you, and I'm writing them down, and I was just going to take notes. Well, the whole book is notes. There is so much information in here that by the time I was done with this, I was like, I got a new thing about HR now. I was like, wow, I did not, even in some of the bigger companies or smaller, I did not realize that and we're going to go through some of this. There is so much that you put in here. And then I have so many questions from the different levels of HR. I understand it more now, because there is no way that it has to be broken up into different job titles. There's so much in here about the different things of being an HR manager.
yeah. So the funny thing is, this is the first book I've ever written strictly for an HR audience.
Yeah.
All my other books are for general management audiences. Anyone can pick one up. So when HarperCollins said, do you want to write this book, The First Time Manager HR? My initial reaction was, of course. And then I thought, this could be The Emperor Has No Clothes. I better make sure that what I'm doing is right. So the funny thing is, Dave, if you look at my other books, I usually have an acknowledgement section where I thank people
Right.
who edited parts of the manuscript. And I usually have somewhere between 5 and 8 people. This book, 24 people, because I had to have all the, what I was doing in international HR 10 years ago, that's changed. Same thing for the M&A HR. What are they doing in recruitment? What's the newest stuff in recruitment these days? I mean, literally, we've got an app for that. It's changing everything the way we do things. So I really wanted to make sure that I had the updates and the vetting from the people who are deep in the trenches right now. And, the book's doing, knock on wood, so far so good. It's really good. It's registering in those top 100 books in human resources that Amazon puts out there. It's pretty consistently in there. So I'm happy to see that. But again, it is a more limited audience in the sense where it's meant for people who are either first-time managers
Right.
or the high potential employees who are like emerging leaders who want to get into management, or even me. When I started, I pretty much started my career in management based on what my history was and everything else.
Right.
But I was a recruiter. And then I learned employee relations. And after that, I learned training. But one thing at a time. But what about comp? What about benefits? What about systems? What about I didn't even know what I didn't even know. So anyone who's already in management who just wants to get a better feel for what the HR suite of
Right.
services offers, that was another audience because that was really the one that I relate to. I would have liked to have had this earlier in my career as a wannabe
Right.
manager, but I also really primarily wrote it as someone who is schooled in 2 or 3 disciplines of HR, who wanted to know what the other aspects were, plus where the future of HR is going. So, that's kind of what the spirit of this book was all about.
Where does all the training come from? Like when there's, like I said, employment law, when here, the union, everything, or you broke it down to so many different parts. How much of the company do a lot of them provide the training, or is this just something that an HR, even starting out, or even it's been in the business like yourself for a while, how do you learn? Where do you get all this information from? I mean, is it just something that just updates and classes and courses? And because I mean, I'm telling you, whoever's going to get this, you got to be the same way I was, because I was like, I couldn't believe what's involved in this book.
Thanks, Sammy. Well, again, think about it as a small business owner. I mean, you want to know what this is all about because this is like the people lever
Right.
within the company. And it says first time manager HR. So people are going to say, well, I'm not a first time manager. And I know you're not, but you have to understand it was on the first time manager umbrella of books.
Right.
I could have just written this book as strictly for HR managers and above, that kind of thing, and business owners. It's the same content, obviously. But to me, I always taught for decades, I taught at UCLA Extension. The School of Business and Management has a 2-year HR certification programs, like
Right.
9 courses. I teach 4 of the 9, or I've taught 4 of the 9 courses. I first went in as a student, though, to get my professional designation, my certificate. So I went in as a student. I began teaching about the same time I began writing for HR Magazine and SHRM. At the same time, I got my first book published for the American Management Association. So
Right.
it was all happening for me. But at my core, I'm a teacher. That's my passion. And that's why, since I started doing the consulting 2 years ago, why I'm having so much fun with this, Dave, is I just get to do the stuff I love. And I'm really
Yeah.
fortunate that way. I'm just really lucky that I can do that. So.
So what do you tell somebody new, Paul, starting out? Like, what do you tell somebody that's young, that's just getting into the market? You pick up the book. What is like the best advice that you can give somebody new and trying to keep up with things, and how to grow within HR? Because now that I know this, I mean, I can see how you're gonna learn forever. I mean, for years through all this.
Well, it's meant to be that, right? It's meant to be this evolutionary training. The training isn't a one and done. There's no book or course
Right.
that's a one and done. But I want when people come to me about HR specifically, I'll just say, make sure you know what you're getting into. Because a lot of
Right.
times people say, I love people. I'm a people person. I want to get into HR. And I say, yeah, but you want to make sure that after a year from now, you don't want to go into accounting because people are driving you crazy. You need to
Right.
understand that
Yep.
it can be very, very intense. And at times where, for example, when we were going through COVID, the needs of the employees, I mean, it's very personal, and you're being there for them as a rock and a foundation means the world to them. They'll never forget you if what
Right.
you're doing right, and you're doing it from your heart. But I just want to make sure that they kind of know what they're getting into. So that's number one. Number two is if HR is truly about the people muscle of any organization, think of all the different ways that you can do it right and you can do it wrong. You can motivate, develop, inspire, and build, or you
Right.
can demotivate. You can cause little groups and to form around you to kind of survive your leadership style, right? There's all this different stuff. So in your heart of hearts, do you really think you like the idea of building stronger leadership muscle? Do you
For
want to
that.
make stronger managers? Because if you do, it's going to show itself in every aspect of the HR function, the discipline. If you're not really too much of a people person, you can still have a role in HR doing analytics or different kinds
Right.
of things. But again, at its heart, it is a people function. So you just want to make sure that you're matching your interests and your desires and your passions to what your career path is going to be.
For that. I wanted to ask you, Paul, the parts in here about you even having there for like unions, being in the unions you have in here. Um, is that is there much of a difference from the unions versus not non-union? Like, everything's still, I mean, nothing changes. The laws are, nothing changes, right? I mean, I know you got in here a lot of things about both, and I was trying to think about, I'm like, wow, but it comes down to still the same issues and concerns.
Yeah, the people piece is going to be the same, but the
Right.
mechanics of how it gets
Right.
resolved are very different.
Oh yeah.
So, just full disclosure, I am a pro-union person. I think where
Right.
we are at this stage of our development as an economy, as a nation, unionism is good. It's needed because we've tilted way too far to the
Right.
side of, enriching the uber rich already, whereas, federal minimum wage hasn't gone up from 7.25 an hour in, I think,
I know.
15 years. I mean,
Yeah, it's the
we're doing
same.
things wrong. So the unions can play a role in balancing out where we are at this point in time. So full disclosure, I am pro-union.
Right.
But what I say in the book is, even if you feel philosophically like I do, companies don't want to go union. You need to understand that. The union is there to kind of get in there and take the employee side against the management team for the most
Right.
part, unless you have someone who's that union agent who's more aware. And some of them are, and some of them aren't. Some of them really do see it as a partnership. If you're lucky enough to get someone from a third party agency who wants to partner with you, take advantage of that.
Take of it.
Also
Yep.
see situations where they're like, your management, you're bad, you're wrong. What was your question? And then you're going to be in a little bit more of a defensive side. But again, philosophically, you don't want your company to go union because it's much more expensive to run a union. Your CEO is going to tell you it's
Right.
about 33% more, not just because you're paying higher wages. That may or may not be the case. It just slows down the process of how
Slows
you can
down.
get things done. It's kind of like living with your mother-in-law, excuse my French, but everything is going to be questioned. Everything needs to be negotiated, right? Terms and conditions of employment are going to be challenged at every stage. So it slows things down. So that's one factor. The other factor too, though, is procedurally, what you're doing is, they're going to go for a grievance, and the grievance can go to
Yep.
arbitration. And from the arbitration, you can have
Yep.
reinstatement with back pay. That's different than in an at-will environment where you can terminate someone. On the other hand, you terminate them, they can go straight to a lawyer. The lawyer can come after you for punitive damages. So it could be better to have a union than to be at
They're
will,
not.
depending on what those damages are going to look like and how
Right.
strong your management and leadership practices are. Reinstating someone with back pay is fairly painless compared
Yeah.
to a seven-figure, discrimination lawsuit that you lost. So it's not right or wrong. It's just different. They're two different styles of getting things done, right? Pay for performance is typically an at-will idea. The union wage scale is every year we're going up X percent. As long as you're in good standing and you can fog the mirror, you're going to get that
You're
2%.
gonna get it.
It's harder to differentiate how you do work versus others. But think about it. Usually unions were done in environments where it is hard to differentiate.
Right.
Sanitation workers, they all basically do the same work. Airline pilots, they basically all do the same work. I mean, does the plane get up and the plane get down? It's hard to say I'm the best pilot of them all. But as a
Right.
salesperson, that wouldn't work in a union environment
That
because you
makes
want to
sense.
incentivize people to perform at a higher level. And that's just sign of there are those differences, Dave. So again, I don't say in the book one is right as one is wrong, but I do say understand that if
Right.
you're in human resources, the company is not going to want to go union, and you need to take that posture for how you read through these chapters. And the 3 chapters the first one was on union organizing attempts
Yep.
and what's your role as a manager? What do you do? And then one was on the idea of going through a strike and a lockout. What can I do? And one was on a decertification process. If the union is
Right.
trying to decertify from the union, what's your role? But you need to know that stuff before it all hits, because this stuff hits and you're blindsided.
Well,
You got
that's
to
the
know
thing.
real quick.
When I read through some of these subjects, I'm like, wow, if you don't have a team and human resources that doesn't know this information, this can be costly on it through everything. I was like, wow, that makes sense now. I can see why they do this, why they do that. Because if not, if you don't have knowledge, somebody with experience or learn, like we've talked about here, that can really come back on you big time. What I read through here, I was like, wow, you ain't joking.
Yeah, there's big consequences these days. The world has become a lot quicker and a lot more complex. And so
Right.
the idea is, to the degree that you can get your HR team or your general managers to be ready for disruption and crisis,
Right.
to be ready for the HR full suite of services, and understanding that you may have never been union, but you are one pizza party away from your employees going union. Because if they go to the
Right.
pizza party with the union, they may be coming back the next day and saying, okay, here are our demands. And you're not going to have time to say, well, we're getting in-house counsel in here to come and train us. First of all, it's going to cost you a fortune. And number two, they don't know the first steps.
Right.
So you've got to kind of get them even like, okay, do we know what we would do? Let's talk about if this were to happen. I think you have to be prepared for that these days. And I think that's why it makes sense to map
It
that out.
is. And then I like the part on here, even what I was learning about the immigration and non-immigration, how you put that in there. And then I was like, I understand, like I-9, E-Verify and all that stuff too, but it was a little bit more in depth. And I was like, wow, I wouldn't even know all these things about that. I mean, the laws, again, the wording that you put in here, this is why I really recommend it. I can see for a new HR person, especially in the beginning, because this just opened my eyes. I'm going to say it over and over, but even on that part there, I was like, you're reading it, you're like, wow, again, all this knowledge, how in the world you keep up with this stuff? I was like, Jesus.
You make me feel so good. No, but okay, so that's international HR days, right? Because we were bringing people into the country on the alphabet soup of visas.
Right.
I was learning, okay, these are the different kinds of visas, the F, the J,
that's
the H1, right? Okay, the O1, the blah, 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 blah. So you're learning about visas. At the same time, you're learning about, non-work or work eligible immigration status.
Yep.
Are they eligible for a green card? What's citizenship mean? Do they have to become a citizen? These are all the questions I had originally. And so as I'm learning it, I'm writing it all out. I'm starting to publish articles. I would go to our outside counsel, who is our immigration lawyer, and say, can I quote you in this article? Can you vet it for me? Would you review it for me? And that idea of, teach what you choose to learn. When I got the job at Paramount, I was already at Paramount, but then our international division was moving from Hammersmith, London to the studio in Hollywood. And I really, really, really wanted that job. I have a master's degree in German. I speak basic French. I'm Italian, the whole 9 yards. I wanted the job and I got it. And the first thing I said to UCLA as I was teaching there, and I had taught the courses on legal aspects of HR, recruitment and selection, workplace or ethics. I taught that course. I said, I want to teach your international HR class. And they said, okay, because I was a pretty well-known teacher. Now, here's what I did, Dave. This is interesting. I was always a student sitting in the front row. Every class for those 12 weeks, I had a guest speaker come in, with the exception of the first one and the last one when they had their finals. And the guest speakers were international immigration lawyer, international tax accountant. I had a guy from Ernst & Young at the time, I remember, international employment lawyer, international headhunter, international relocation provider. And as these people were coming in, I'm taking my notes and I'm building my network. And they would come in and talk for the first hour, hour and a half of a 3-hour class. By the time I was done with that class 12 weeks later, I had an immediate network. And of course, they all wanted to come in because it was UCLA and they were doing a commercial, so to speak, right? It was a great marketing idea for them. By the time I taught that class 3 or 4 times, I was nailing it. My confidence went through the roof. And that's kind of where that came from. But not everyone's going to have the same experience as me. And so even if you don't have international, you still need to know international, because you may find out that your company's opening an office in Mexico or Canada or whatever. You need to know this. In Asia, Latin America, Europe, very, very different rules. So good to kind of raise awareness about the whole international employment law background and what it entails.
That is, because then you were even talking about, like, when I was looking at the remote work, I didn't realize, you're in all different states. How does that even fit in the book here? You talked about remote work. How in the world does that even, come into play? Because you might have people on the East Coast, West Coast, all over, and even overseas, like you said, overseas that are remote. There's got to be different laws and everything throughout all these different states, right? So it's not just the one.
Yeah, absolutely. And then someone, you're in Pickett, you're in New York, and someone says, I'm going to work in New Jersey or Pennsylvania, right? Because that's where they want to live. So they leave and they move. Now, all of a sudden, you got someone payrolled in Pennsylvania. You got to pay your payroll taxes and file in Pennsylvania as an employer. Companies sometimes don't realize that. And certainly the workers don't. They're like, what's the big deal? And it's like, no, it is a big deal, or it could be a big deal. So again, one of the challenges that happened during COVID is when companies said you can work remotely, a lot of people in San Francisco left San Francisco and they moved to San Diego because the weather's nicer, it's not as expensive, it's not as crowded, and they like the beach. Well, the problem is when you hear just last week, Amazon says everyone needs to come back 100%
I saw that.
on site. Yep. It's like, yeah, but I don't live there anymore. Now I live in San Diego. Now you got to make an employment decision. Are you moving back to San Francisco, or are you just going to resign from the job? So there's so
That's
many moving parts, but this pandemic was a once in a century event that it's going to take us 5 years. I mean, if it went 20 to 21, 22, it took about 3 years. I'd say from 22 to 27, we're
right.
going to be dealing with all of this stuff. This isn't going away overnight. And of course, there's a presidential election in the middle of it, plus the supply chain problems we have, plus the perception that the companies are gouging us. I mean, where do you go? And then you throw in what's happening in Florida right now as
Right.
we
All
speak,
over.
with the hurricanes and the extreme weather situations. We turn on the news, we hear about the violence in the schools. That's, again, I'm kind of twisting back to the Leading Through Crisis and Disruption book, but
Right.
it's the same idea. You have to be sharp. You got to be on your feet. You got to have a good level of self-confidence and a healthy level of self-awareness. And if my books were able to do anything, it was things, teach the how, make sure they know how to open the conversation, make sure they
Gotta
know how
hold
to
it.
dissect the
Lem-
problem. And if there's a crisis coming up, or all of a sudden you find you're now in charge of benefits. I've never
I
done
know.
benefits before. Okay, but we're having the meeting with the broker next week, and it's time to renegotiate. Paul, are you comfortable doing that?
Right.
Yeah, I think so. Well, what are the 5 levers you're going to push? You need to know what you're asking for as soon as you go into that meeting with these benefits brokers, because if you're not pushing on those levers, they're not necessarily going to volunteer it. But you want to manage your costs. You have to know what buttons to push. So that became the chapter on benefits. It's that type of thing, Dave. Again,
That
horse sense, in the sense where this isn't that hard to figure out. There's nothing new under the sun. But not everybody in HR could be a benefits guru. Yet you may be called in to become the benefits guru because someone just left and now you're in charge of that. And you're right on the cusp of open enrollment. You got to renegotiate your rates and everything else. The drama kicks in. So hopefully it eliminates a lot of that drama feel.
And there is. That's what I said with all this in here. Then I like the part, you talked about the COVID thing, but again, when you talk in the book again, is that about the silent generation, the baby boomers, the Gen X, the Gen Y, the Gen Z. When you look at the book, you put everything in here. It seems to kind of be a little bit different for each one. Like which like the problems happens right now with the Gen Z versus the baby boomer generation. But even the silent, and you have it all in there. And that was interesting to read how you put how many people, between 55 million silent generation, the boomers, 75 million, baby bus, 44 million. It just went on. And I was like, all the problems that they can encounter from here.
It's interesting stuff, isn't it? When you look at
It
it.
is.
I mean, the funny thing for me is in our last company, my last company from 2017 to 2022, I spent 5 years as the Chief Human Resources Officer for the Motion Picture and Television Fund, which is a healthcare nonprofit, but it's basically the retirement home for the actors and the
Right.
people in the entertainment industry. COVID hit us very, very hard, as you'd imagine. COVID was first discovered at a retirement home in Seattle. When we first heard about it as Americans, that's where it hit land, so to speak. And because of the vulnerability of the elderly population, it was really, really tough. But you're
Right.
looking at things now, historically, we've never had more than 3 generations in the workplace. We actually have 5 now. We hired someone who's a senior level management person in our nursing division who was 78 years old. She was tired of staying home. We needed people. She came back at 78 and she rocked it. She was wonderful. At the same time, when you look at the Gen Z Zoomers, the 25 and under crowd, they are
Right.
testing out as the loneliest, most isolated, and most depressed generation on the planet. And the reason is they're the first truly digital generation, but because of the digitalization movement, the socialization is missing. What
Right.
you and I had as kids, talking to our friends and hanging out on the street in the summertime, they don't have that anymore. And COVID did not help by
No.
making everyone work remotely. So it's like, wait a second. We've kind of lost the ability as a society, not even in the business world, as a society, to sit around the campfire and pass wisdom from the elders down to the younger generation.
Yep.
We're too busy. We're looking at our phones. We've got our own issues. I get it. But you know what? We owe that to the Zoomers because they need to figure this stuff out. And they've missed out on high school years. They've missed out on college years. They missed out on graduations. In a lot of ways, the things that you and I kind of took for granted and have such good memories over, that generation was denied it. And we owe them that. And when they talk about CEOs wanting to have people back in the workplace, part of it is this, productivity paranoia. They can't see people and they want to be sure they can see them so they know they're working. That's part of the story. Part of the story is they want greater collaboration, team
Right.
building. They want a greater sense of camaraderie and trust, because when they were young, as many of like me, I had my friends at work, I had my mentors at work. If you're working remotely and you don't have any of that, you're missing out on a rich experience. And some CEOs I've talked to have said, I worry about the Zoomers. I think they really do need to come back into the workplace because they
Right.
need to be more socialized. So don't make it
I
so
didn't
black
think of
and
it that
white.
way. I know what you're saying. I know what you're
Yeah,
saying now. Okay,
it's
I get
both
it. I get it.
sides, two sides
I
to
know
a
it.
story.
You just
Yeah.
I just picked that out right there. Okay, I get it now. When you were saying when they don't have that, it makes total sense. I like how you put you always put in some history in your book. I like how the demographic shifts. You said World War II,
Yeah.
1946 to 1964, they introduced birth control, and that's when 75 million babies were born over an 18-year period. I
Yeah.
love that.
10,000 babies a day from 1946, when the war was ended, to 1964,
Right,
when they introduced the pill. Well, here's what happened that no one paid any attention to. In 2011, the first baby boomers turned 65. So
right.
now measure 18 years, 2011 to 2029, 10,000 people a day retire in this country. 75 million people are moving into retirement, and we're only 5 years away from the entire baby boom being gone.
Oh, that's wow.
So,
That's
so there's your
sense.
lack of human beings. Okay, problem number one. Problem number two, people like me,
Right.
I'm part of the gray resignation, right? I left early. I decided some people retired early. I wanted to have my own business, but I should technically be working in a full-time job, but I'm not. So I'm another problem. Problem three, following the baby boom, was the baby bust. Gen
Right.
X, only half
Yep.
the size, roughly half the
Yeah.
size.
Baby
So that's
butt. Yep.
another problem. And this labor scarcity, what's interesting to me, Dave, is this is happening. There's a great book out there. It's called The Next 100 Years. And it's by George Friedman. It was a New York Times bestseller, came out in 2009. So it was pre-COVID. But it
Right.
basically talked about projecting out for the rest of the century what's going on. Labor scarcity in the industrialized nations is a massive, massive phenomenon. And what they're talking about is when you look at China's one child policy, which went
Right.
on for 40 years, for way too long, China doesn't have the next gen to cover the elders. When you
That
look
makes
at
sense.
Japan, Japan has 125 million people. By 2050, it's going to be 88 million. The average age is going to be over 65. Who's going to do the work? South Korea has the lowest birth rate on the planet. Where are the people coming from? Now, part of that'll be offset by machines, machine learning and AI,
Right.
and I get that. But the truth of the matter is the paradigm is going to shift from talent acquisition, which is something we've always taken for granted in this country, to talent development. You got to know how to grow your own, because you're not always going to be able to run an ad on Indeed or LinkedIn
The
and have
same.
the fish jump in the boat. You kind of get your head around these bigger tectonic shifts that are happening out there. Talent development, if you can get good at building muscle and building people up, that is going to be one of the key skills
That's
that are
what I like
needed
because
going
that's
forward
what
in leaders.
you put in about the top 5 desires: career, professional development, diversity of thoughts and ideas. And I did ethical employer. I like words, and I'm thinking, all right, what is ethical employer? I know what ethics means, but is it something that companies need to be known as? Or and then you said the work-life balance, discuss how important that has changed, and the corporal social responsibility and environmentalism. That's what threw me because I was like, wow, that's another thing that you have in the book there about that I didn't think about the environment. I didn't realize how much in this book it talks even about that, and I was like, that's why I said this whole book here, it just covers so many different subjects, and that's what blew my mind.
Hey, thanks, Dave. It was a fun book
Yeah.
to write because there's so much going on right now. It's not just faster, as I said, it's more complex. And so the lighter you can be on your feet, the better. For
Right.
managers, I tell them a lot in my sessions and stuff. It's like every once in a while, you got to get your people out of the weeds. I know we live
Right.
in the weeds, we work in the weeds, we breathe in the weeds. Get them up to the 30,000-foot view. Have them look down at what's happening so they can see it more objectively, more dispassionately. And when they
Right.
have that difference in perspective, they're going to feel better because they feel like they have more control. Also, when you're up at the 30,000-foot level, you can see a lot further out. So
That
you can
makes
start
sense.
talking about it's a different conversation, but that's where the coach is the leader, or the leader is coach model, as I call it. Those are the kinds of opportunities that you have to build that muscle because you're building their emotional intelligence. You're helping
Right.
them build their sense of self-confidence. And then you come down back to the weeds, which is where we all live and breathe. But in a staff meeting once in a while, get them out of the weeds because they feel like they're inside a pinball machine and the flippers just keep banging them around and they're out of control. It's really intense these days, but give them that peace of mind.
That's for that part. Yeah. And then I just enjoyed that. And then let's see, I wanted to say, I like how you said, you discussed opportunities what HR has to offer, many changes and evolve, but you say, be careful what you wish for. And I had to read that again. I was like, be careful, because the great resignation, that's what we talked about, the gray resignation, the great regret, the quiet quitting and quiet firing. So all that right there, I was like, all right, what does it mean there? Like, be careful what you ask for when I was read that part.
We finally got our seat at the table.
Right. And that's
HR has
what it
always
right
been
there.
saying, I want my seat at the table. Guess what? COVID gave it to you, because
You got
now
it.
CEOs realize that the most important asset they really have, and we're not just paying lip service, goes home every night and may not come back the next day, right?
Yep.
It's that pizza parlor that survived COVID by having takeout only because no one could come in the restaurant. And they
Right.
finally get the green light to say, COVID is over. Congratulations, you made it. And now they can't find cooks. They can't find waiters. And they're like, wait, are we going to have to close now that COVID is over because we can't find anyone to do the work? Well, that's just
Right.
not your local pizza parlor. That's Fortune 500 too. The talent scarcity is really tough. Now the markets change, and I get that, but the true matter is these jobs that are being created, finding the talent to do the work is going to
To do
remain a
it
challenge for the remainder of the century. And we just have to kind of get in that mindset.
for that. And we got like about 10 more minutes here. And I love, you put a lot of emphasis in here about the all-important process and what it did, talent acquisition, and how important it plays the role. And that's what got me on this one part is how you said, if it's not done correctly, but how do people, I don't think, check in on those 30 days, on those 60 days, on those 90 days, and really sit down with them. And you put that in the book here about that, and get to learn. And because that's really, I think when you said about the muscle of the company, put that behind them, because it was just amazing when I was reading how much you talked about in here about the retention, also everything all together.
I love how well you read my books.
Yeah.
You're just so good for me. Okay, so
Yeah.
excuse me, quick sentence on that one. They come aboard, they go through one day of new hire
Yeah.
orientation, right? Where they fill out all the forms and off you go. Good
Right.
luck. Call me if you need anything.
I know.
That is such a missed opportunity. So here's how I would do it. If I were a department head, it could be the immediate manager of the employee, but better if you're the department head. Meet with those new hires for day 30, day 60, day 90. There's different
Right.
questions you're asking them, which I
Yep.
outlined in the book. Not just how are you doing? You need real questions.
Right.
But the bottom line is when you check in and you start asking them questions about, who's been the most influential, who's been the most helpful, that's good for building your bench. You know who your best leaders are right there because you're hearing from them. Also, you know what the experience is from a fresh set of eyes. That
Right.
really is important. These are not people that have access to grind or baggage or anything else. But here's the key. After you do, and these meetings book 30 minutes, they don't even take that long. It may only take 15
Right.
minutes, but what a good use of your time with that new hire. Book day 30, book day 60, book day 90, different sets of questions. Day 90, you change the game. And on day 90, you say, look, Paul, up to now, I've been calling these meetings because I want to hear how things are going. I want to switch it. I want you to call a meeting with me 90 days from now at your 6-month anniversary. I
Right.
want you to put the time on my calendar. I want you to develop the agenda. My job is to listen and coach.
Makes
Okay.
sense.
But you set that time with me because I want to hear how you're doing in terms of your performance, in terms of your goal progress, in terms of your career and professional development. If you think there's any additional training that you need, but make of it what you want. Some people come in, they just want to talk. Some people come in with spreadsheets and letters of recommendation and bells and whistles and Gantt charts and all this. However you want to do it, make it your own. But I'd
Right.
like to meet with you on a quarterly basis, but you're fully responsible for scheduling those meetings, and we'll do them one quarter at a time.
So you're
for
putting
right
it on
now,
them. I like how you said it. You're putting it on them also.
they're
That's not bad.
adults.
I like that. Yeah, I like that.
Absolutely. And
Yes.
again, the point is you don't have to motivate anybody because motivation is internal, but your job is to create the space where people can motivate themselves. And
Right.
that does it. That's one of those things where it's like, picture that person going home and saying to the spouse, honey, my boss's boss, my department head called a meeting with me. And we had a
Yeah.
really good conversation. And I'm going to meet with him in 3 months. He's telling me I'm a little nervous. I put the
No.
time on his calendar and come up with the agenda and tell him how I'm doing, what suggestions I have for the department. But boy, that creates the coaching culture.
Right.
And that's really what you want. So anyway, Dave, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think the onboarding piece
Yeah.
sets the stage for creating an achievement mindset
That's
and
what hit
getting
me
them
most.
focused on
Yep.
that. Yeah.
That's what hit me most, because I think when you read some, and again, everybody, you got to get this book, because I can't even, if I was to talk about everything we had, Paul, tonight, I mean, we're ready to go, we're going to be calling it here. I can't even tell you. It's all typed out. It's all down to, and I think the, what I like about these books again is it's just some great ideas and training and stuff that you're just not aware of that HR has, and all the hands in there and what they have to do. Again, it's changed my whole outlook on, not just coming in, letting the person go and everything behind the scenes, because you talk about, I mean, there was a part in here about, again, the rewards, compensation, attract the different types of people, pay discrepancies. I didn't realize there was so much just for pay discrepancies,
Yeah.
and different things, that from people taking on lunch and not sitting at their desk and eating when they
Yeah.
should
The
be on
wage and
lunch
hour
break.
issues. Sure. Sure.
I looked through all that and I was like, wow, I didn't even think about that. I
Dave, the
said,
funny thing for me is I love storytelling.
right.
And I think when people can get into a story and they understand
Yep.
how it works, it registers more. You give them a rule or a policy, it goes in one ear and out the other. Put it in a context that they can relate to. And
Right.
it just sticks. It's stickier, so to speak. It makes sense. They filter it through their own experiences. So, yeah, thank you. You're always so complimentary of my books. I am so
Yeah.
appreciative of you. I really
It
am.
is. And again, I want to thank you as always. You always come on. What is, you got to tell me, what's the next one? Come on. What's the next one? Is there another one coming? Not
Nope,
for a while, right?
not for a while.
Okay.
I've written now with the 5-book series that came out in
Yeah.
2022. And then First Time Manager Leading Through Crisis came out in 23. And First Time Manager HR came out in 24.
Right.
This ride is cooling his jets for a little while. I'm just going to kind of go a little slow right now. I need a little breathing room. But
I,
thank you, though. Maybe there'll be another one, hopefully.
yeah, there'll be another one there. But again, for everybody out there, again, the first time manager for HR, you got to get this. I'm telling you, even if you're like in the manager, like as myself, and as a recruiter, I mean, you just learn so much in here. You have a different respect, again, like I said, on HR. It's just opened my eyes up on a lot of different things. I was actually going to say, wow, how does somebody even start out with this? Because it's so much. It's like like you said, the courses, different courses you can take. But what made you, the last question here, Paul, is like, what made you really get this one here? You seem to really put a lot of information in this. I mean, like on steroids, I'll say it again. There is so much in here. I can't even explain it all.
No, it's nice, Dave. It wasn't to overwhelm. That's not the goal. It's to
Right.
raise awareness. Because a lot of times, to your point, you're a recruiter, but you've never worked in compensation.
Right.
So you don't know
Right.
how what the rules are. And again, if you don't understand the idea of internal equity is the concept I bring up in the book, which means when you're looking at a team, you can't bring in someone new
Right.
who's making more than the people on the team, assuming they have similar experience. You'll hire one person, you're going to lose 3, because the 3 that find out you're hiring the new guy at more than what you're paying them, they're not going to necessarily come and
Yeah.
complain. They're just going to start a job search. So
Yep.
again, if you don't have a really thorough understanding of the rules of compensation as a recruiter, you're shooting in the dark all the time.
I know.
So it's those kinds of things. They all connect. It's one big circle. We're talking about the people experience, from
Right.
hiring them and onboarding them to motivating them and developing, holding them accountable, possibly having to terminate or lay off. You need to know the whole thing, because
The
it'll
whole
help you
thing.
understand your perspective, what's your standpoint, what's your
Right.
vantage point from whatever you're doing in HR in terms of how it affects everybody else in the organization.
No, I want to thank you so much, Paul. And again, if you just want to tell people who you are, what you do, and where you're at, and I just think it's great. And you've changed my life a lot. You've given me a lot of information, and I'll tell you, I use it as my training, because it's like you can learn so much from these, and that's what I really appreciate what you've done. I mean, it affects me, because I buy the books and I love reading them.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And no one has as many of my books as you do, Dave. So I'm
Yeah.
telling you,
Whew. Yeah.
it's wonderful. No, my name is Paul Falcone. My website is paulfalconehr.com. And if anyone wants to send me a LinkedIn invite, I'd love to connect. It's just Paul Falcone 1 on
Yep.
LinkedIn. And yeah, these days it's management training,
Yep.
and it's keynote speaking, and it's executive coaching. Those are the three things that I've been spending all my time on. So
Yeah,
it's
I've
been
seen
great.
you all over there. So again, Paul, thank you so much. And I'm going to talk to you after this and appreciate it as always. And we'll be waiting for that next one. All right.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for
Thank
everything.
you. I'll talk to you right after this.